Well, I think the United States has been allied with, again, with this sort of fanatic enclave that took the name Israel to operate, and it's that alliance that's really most troubling. And we were been pulled into other alliances in part into that region because of that initial alliance. We were warned against it. We did it anyway. George Marshall, who was Truman's Secretary of State, said, "If you recognize this enclave, I'm going to vote against you." And he went back and wrote a memo to that effect. He was Truman's Secretary of State. These forces have been playing out for decades in the region. The initial land grab in 1967 set off the dynamics of provocation that are now playing themselves out in the region. It drew us into Iraq. It drew us into Afghanistan. Now we're in Yemen. We had a no-fly zone in Iraq. Now we've got one in Libya. So I'm suspicious, frankly, of the forces that have manipulated us. Our State Department has long ago been dominated by Zionists, both Christian and Jewish, within the United States, and it's well known. So to me, it's not as hopeful as I mean. You want to support the Yemenese forces. At the same time, you need to look at the broader dynamics that are playing themselves out.
I'd like to come back to the issue of al-Qaeda there raised by Robert Gates, but first I want to go back to Dr. Yamani in Beirut. Dr. Yamani, the issue of al-Qaeda was also raised by President Saleh himself, and a lot of people are saying that Ali Abdullah Saleh has picked up the same points that Muammar Gaddafi did, civil war and the threat from al-Qaeda. Why do you think he is giving that issue, making that issue of al-Qaeda a threat now and using it, and what do you think his intentions are?
It's a sign of desperation and the knowledge that his days are numbered, because we've heard this before, even from Mubarak. We've heard it, Muslim Brotherhood. We heard that the Houthis, who he had considered terrorists or described as terrorists. We have heard about warnings of civil war. The reality is that during the regime or the rule of Ali Abdullah Saleh, it was when Yemen has, since the beginning of January 2010, was seen as a risk, security risk for the world. So this rhetoric really, and sort of like, after me the deluge, and you will find civil war, it's the usual thing we have heard from other rulers who do not want to read the writing on the wall. The most important thing is, and Ali Abdullah Saleh has not been in control of his, more than half of Yemeni territory. I just want to add that while the United States had continued with its double standards and policies, it has become recently, since this Arab revolutions, marginalized. But the real risks here for the US and for Saudi Arabia is that Yemen, like Bahrain, is a shield for Saudi security, because the most important region in the south is Yemen, where I just want to remind you of a saying that they have in Saudi Arabia in the south, is that the borders of Yemen end at the door of the Kaaba. And that means the tribes, the people, and the ideas are going through the borders, and the borders are porous.
Very interesting indeed. Mr. Avendon, what was raised there by Dr. Yamani, she was telling us of the stance that's been adopted in the case of Yemen and Bahrain, very much alike from the United States. And a lot of people have been saying that the stance that's been adopted by the United States toward Yemen at the best is vague. And we've been seeing the same kind of stance on Bahrain, whereas this is not the stance that they've adopted about the people in Libya, even about the people in Egypt or Tunisia. Do you see that vagueness as well, and how do you interpret it?
It very much is vague. We can be absolutely certain, because of the long-standing relationship with Ali Abdullah Saleh, that they would prefer him to remain in power. They would have preferred that there was no protest taking place inside of Yemen, just as they would have preferred to hold on to Mubarak and on to Ben Ali, and that there would be no unrest, no war taking place inside of Libya. But things don't quite work like that for them, and they're now desperately trying to find out which way they will have to bend, the better to defend their interests. I think they're going to come down on the side that Saleh has to go, and that they will be trying to find somebody, desperately trying to find somebody who is in accord with US, Western and Saudi interests. I must say that the US does this because of the interests of the US. It may be quite convenient for some Americans to try and find a small number of Jews who are responsible, but I'm afraid this is America. This is the United States of America, which has been allied with Saudi Arabia since before the State of Israel was created. So it's a dangerous route to go down, the kind of argument from our friend in Phoenix. And it certainly doesn't explain what's taking place. Not only the United States, but France and Britain. France and Britain have led the drive for an air war, a war in fact, over Libya. So the double standards are clear. We know what they would like to do. Whether they're able to do that, I think, is a very, very different question indeed.
Well, let's put that question to our guest in Phoenix, Jeff Gates. When we are speaking about the US stance in here, it's pretty obvious that the stance on Bahrain and Yemen is very much different from the stance that's been taken towards Libya or towards, as I said, the North African countries, and then towards countries in the Middle East that are very close to Saudi Arabia. Would you say that this is a double standard, as Mr. Ovenden is saying, and that this is hypocritical from the side of the United States?
Well, this is the challenge of separating what U.S. policy and American policy is from the State Department and from those within our government who, for example, took us to war on false intelligence into Iraq. So I challenge your guest in Beirut on that issue. You keep in mind when we put in place the no-fly zone in northern Iraq, by the time we invaded in March of 2003, there had been 100 Mossad operatives active in Mosul for a decade at that point. So I think if we look deeply into this, we're going to find there's something more going on here than is yet apparent. But what is apparent is the United States now looks guilty by association. And that's the theme. That has been a theme of those who've been, in effect, waging war on the U.S. from inside the U.S. while pretending to be our allies and dispatching our military to serve an agenda that most Americans have no idea that they're being manipulated to serve. So that's a very challenging message for you to hear in Tehran or Beirut or elsewhere, but that's what the facts point to that very clearly. And it's disturbing for me as an American to find this out, but most Americans do not know this because they can't access the real facts of how this sort of transgenerational syndicate operates in plain sight to displace facts with what you can be induced to believe, such as belief in Iraqi WMD and this sort of thing. So it's disturbing, but unfortunately the facts point to that common source, and that's what I'm hoping as we pull back the cover, I'm anticipating we will find those forces at work.
Yeah, and Jeff, so this is decisions that are, though, being made by the administration in the United States, right? Because that's what Kevin Ovenden was telling us. It is America making these decisions and making these moves.
Well, Hillary Clinton is the one who persuaded Barack Obama to make this change. She was advised by Samantha Powers, whose husband you can look up on the line, and Susan Rice, the UN ambassador. They overruled Robert Gates and our head of counterterrorism and our Joint Chiefs. And so I think this is the challenge, because when you're in this situation and people clearly are in an oppressive situation and they want to be out from under it, that's all well and good. Yet I think if you look at the chessboard, you look at the dynamics and who is really favored by this and who will in fact be disfavored by it, and in large part it's going to be the U.S., as you hear your other speakers indicate clearly that. And so again, that's why I call this book Guilt by Association, how deception and self-deceit took America to war. Right. And those forces are still very active inside our State Department and our foreign policy making apparatus.
All right, I'd like to go to London now. Dr. Yamani, in the time that we have left before we end the program, Dr. Yamani, Yemeni youth and opposition parties have rejected the Saudi mediation to give Saleh 6 months from now. Do you think, Yemenis at this point accept the mediation, or does the offer seek to give some breathing space to Saleh, do you think?
The Saudi rulers really are in no a position or in a place to mediate, because they have not, they're not neutral mediators. They are the ones who conducted war in the north with the Houthis. There are lots of tensions, and the view of the Saudi rulers by the majority of the young Yemenis is a repressive regime who have been against any talk, even in Bahrain, of constitutional monarchy. And other than the repression, they were the people who have conducted that war on Sa'da and the north of that country. And there is a lot of resentment about what they have done, what the Saudis have done in Yemen.
All right, I'd like to thank author and Middle East scholar Dr. Mai Yamani joining us there live from London. A big thank you as well to author and political analyst Kevin Avendon in Beirut with us, and attorney and author of the book Guilt by Association, Jeff Gates, joining us there live from Phoenix, Arizona. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us on this edition of News Analysis from me, Homa Lezgi, and our team here in Tehran. Thanks so much for being with us, and goodbye.